So now that we're getting into a somewhat post-pandemic world, first of all, I'm dead because Canada is
Yeah,
now
like
being praised as like number one for vaccines. Everybody's getting vaccinated and like fastest rate of vaccinations. So good time when we like basically said F you to every single political leader in this country. I've said the same sentence in terms of like our vaccine rollout is bad in maybe
because it's
100 different ways
trash.
now. I'm like, it's
Because
garbage.
it
It's
needs to be
botched.
said.
It's shit. The fucked up vaccine rollout. Like I am like the vaccine rollout in Canada is garbage.
So when I fled Canada to get my vaccine, because I was like, I'm never gonna get it here, and I like literally left. I was like, I need this vaccine.
Oh, you're
Bye.
not wrong. You're not wrong. Um, but now that we're entering into this like post-pandemic world, I feel like you and it's bringing up a lot of not pressure, but it's making us think about what our next step is. And it's making us rethink decisions that we had put on hold in the pandemic. And it all has to do with where we want to live and where we want to go from here.
Yes, I was having this conversation with my cousin um, because when I was away, when I was in New York, I literally was like, should I move to New York? I literally, and like, it's so funny because both of us are like, either I'm going to stay in my childhood home for the rest of my life, or I'm leaving the country. Bye, peace out. I'm going to freaking Timbuktu. Anyways, when I was in New York, I was like, I was like, I want to move here. Like, I felt so good, and I wanted to leave. Um, and then when I came back, and we were talking, and we were like, should we move to Vancouver? It's first of all wild. Second of all, I was having this conversation with my cousin and she was like, well, why don't you? Like literally she was like, why don't you? Like you're going to be 26. Like don't you want to like start your own life? Like don't you want to like do your own thing? Like don't you want that? Like why do you want to stay at home? And part of it is not that I want to stay at home because I think both of us especially over the last like year and a half or so have been very much like yeah like I don't really want to stay at home anymore and I kind of want to take the next step and like do my own thing, but I think a big part of why we're unable or like maybe more okay with not making that change now is because I think in both of our cultures it's actually very normal to stay with your family for longer.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like when you're like 18 and you're like, peace out, mom and dad. I'm going to go do my own thing. It's like literally what own thing? You literally have to run everything by your parents. And two, I think just in general, like the family unit is something that is preserved or kept for so much longer in both of our cultures than it is in like a Western culture.
100%. I feel like first of all, in my culture, in general, specifically Lebanese, but also in general Arab culture, you stay with your family until you're married.
Yeah.
And
Well, that is the like traditional thing in Indian culture as well, or in South
yeah,
Asian culture. Yeah.
having an intergenerational house is also something that's very common.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
live with your parents, and then you have once you get married, it's that just the cycle keeps going. And so I never felt this rush to leave my house. The only pressure that I did feel is this like Western societal pressure being like, oh, you still live with your parents?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And I
I
yeah.
feel this like I don't I think you were kind of like alluding to it, but it's like I feel this guilt because I am very cognizant that like y- yes, like I do have a life that's outside of my family, that's outside of my parents, and I want to grow that and actually live it. Um, but my family is also my life, and so I feel guilty leaving my parents behind. And I think that's just we were talking about this, but I think that's just the price of being an immigrant. Like that's just what comes
Yeah.
with it.
I think too, like the responsibility, I think it's less for me at least, and I think partially you too. I think it's a little less guilt of leaving them behind, but I think it's more the responsibility you feel towards your parents. And I think about that a lot because I think about that with myself. I think about that with like you, um, with other people I know who are South Asian. There is such a strong sense of responsibility towards your parents. And like this idea of like taking care of them or being there for them or supporting them or whatever it might be. And obviously, like if we're talking about us in this particular phase of our life, we're thinking about moving out. My parents are very supportive. Like my mom is literally like, "Yes, you're 26. Like, aren't you going to go?" But then
Like,
like
when are you
she's
leaving?
literally like,
We're
"Well,
like,
when are you gonna go?" She's
these
like,
Western norms. Meanwhile, your mom's like, so like,
yeah, my mom's
when are you
like,
moving on?
"TikTok, like the clock is ticking." Laya, my sister, she's literally like, "When are you leaving so I can move into your room?" Like everybody's like, "Bitch, get the fuck out." No, I'm kidding. They're not. But like they literally are at the same time. Um, but I just mean like you also feel this sense of like responsibility like towards your family that I think kind of comes with one like just being an immigrant and like having like non-western like views about like your family life and like what that means. But a lot of people that I've spoken to also will be like, yeah, no, like it's my job to take care of my parents, like I'm going
Mhm.
to take care of my parents, and that's just like what I'm gonna do. And oftentimes it's at the expense of like moving to another country or you know having those like types of like romantic relationships. Like I know some people who are like, I'm just not there except to take care of my parents, or like I'm doing things with my parents, and I'm like, oh well, that's interesting, because like you would just think this would be the time where you would do the opposite. But I really think it's because of like the way that we think about things or the way that we're like raised, even though my mom's like leave, but you know.
Yeah. No, it's funny because my family is exactly like that in the sense that they're like they are encouraging me to live my life, but I just know that when the time comes, like neither one of us is gonna like I'm gonna feel bad for leaving. They're not gonna want me to leave, and it's
Yeah.
just gonna be bittersweet. But I know that eventually that you do have to leave. And I feel like to some extent, like we were talking about this in our last episode, but you kind of have to assimilate. Like you kind of have to at one point, what is it like fly the nest, leave the nest?
Yeah, and I think too, like I think a big part of actually being able to support your family, and this is something that I'm trying to like, this is something that I'm realizing and like coming to terms with, is supporting your family doesn't just mean being physically with them all the time. Like it actually means giving them space and giving you space so that when you show up in a better way. Um, and that's something that like I'm learning, and I think like, is just, it's a different way of thinking about what support means, but like, but it's true. Like you can't just like be with your parents or with your family now for like the rest of your life. And that doesn't mean that you like cut them out and you're like mom and dad who.
Yeah.
But I think, I don't know, I think I'm just like kind of learning that maybe being there for your family or supporting your family doesn't mean like literally being there beside them, and more so like having the space for yourself and then being able to show up in a more productive way.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, you go.
No, I was gonna say that we're both also anxious people and we have an anxious attachment style. And so it makes sense that we're both like, I'm just gonna get comfy. I'm not gonna leave. And I can see things with my eyes and be there physically like I need to be.
And you know what, too? Like, I think, like people always talk about this and we also talk about this, but like the pandemic really has exacerbated a lot of these like underlying, questions or anxieties about this, because I think, for a long time we were like, we are going to leave. Like, I remember at the beginning of 2020, like literally we were like, let's go, let's pack up, like we like, I remember like I was talking to my mom and I was like, nope, we're
I
gonna leave on this day, and she's like, I put it in my calendar, bitch, leave.
Do you
um
remember we were like, we're gonna have the conversation about moving out in September. And
yeah,
then you told your mom and you were your mom was
mom
like,
was like,
okay, so September 1st?
yeah, she was like, okay, tell me a day. She was like, tell me the date and time. She's like, I need to know the exact moment this conversation is happening. But yeah, like we were in 2019, we were like, we're gonna have the conversation in September and we're
Yeah.
gonna leave by the beginning of 2020. We're gonna like start looking. We're going to figure it out. We're going to give ourselves like 3 months. We're going to leave. And then obviously, while we were still having those conversations, then it was 2020 and then it was the pandemic. And so we kind of, I think, used it as like a slight crutch to no longer have those conversations. And and we were kind of like, okay, we'll just like see how it goes. And then obviously the pandemic has continued to persist and it's just allowed us to put off this conversation for longer and longer. But it's also it also really does make you think about what you're doing. Like, why would I want to go to Toronto for us? And like, why would I want to move to Toronto where the lifestyle that you're moving for is not happening. It's not there because of the pandemic. And the pandemic has also bred a lot of like social anxiety and fear around what's going to happen next, what society and like communities are going to look like, what life is going to look like. And yeah, like you said, like we're very anxious people. So it's, I think that just like makes it hard also. But I think for us, especially like growing up in the suburbs, this idea of like being independent means like leaving home after you finish university and then like going to Toronto and living in Toronto and that's what we're going to do has been like literally like engraved into our brain. Like it has been like etched in stone into our brain. And
from like high school, literally from high school.
Well, literally from high school, it's like you would go into Toronto for like the day or for like a weekend or not the weekend, like a day in the weekend, on the weekend, whatever. And it would be like this like shiny thing and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna be like so cool and I'm gonna grow up and I'm gonna like move to Toronto and like live this like life. And then I think, like when we kind of were thinking about it, it did make us think critically about whether or not that's actually something we wanted or like whether or not that's like a lifestyle that we even wanted, because it's literally something that's just been like spoon fed to us.
Yeah.
And people just like, it's just like this thing you like churn out and you do. And it's like, well, do I even really want to do that?
I feel like the pandemic has made us question that in all aspects of our life.
Yeah,
Like
agreed. No,
literally
totally.
from A to Z, like it's just made us question it. And I think too, like we were talking about this, we're not the type of people that can just get up and go.
No.
We're not spontaneous. We like to know what's going to
Literally,
happen.
I'm -% spontaneous.
I
Like,
used to think it was uncool to be unspontaneous, and now I just don't give a fuck. Like I want an itinerary. I want to know what's going to happen next. And that's just because we're anxious people.
yeah, and also I think too, like it's not that I'm unflexible. It's just like I can't just like get up and do this big thing in my life. And like,
Yeah.
we talk about people in both of our lives, whatever, who just like will do things, who will like get up and
Yeah.
go, who will just like make these big decisions kind of seems like on a whim.
Yeah.
And I think that really comes from the privilege of stability. Not that both of us have not had stability, but it's a different type of stability of like, what type of stability was it? I literally stopped talking.
It's different if like we we both came as immigrants, so we
Yeah.
never had that full stability in our lives. That being said, I did have a stable childhood, but just the fact that we had to like uproot, and it's
Yeah.
not that I am coming from a generation of immigrants. I myself am an immigrant, and so
Yeah.
that connection to my family, that connection to my home, that like fear of get up and go, it doesn't sit well with me because to your point, like we didn't have that type of stability.
Yeah.
And so I don't feel like the ground beneath me is stable enough for me to just move wherever and whenever.
Exactly. And that's exactly what it is. And I think too, like, it's so many things where there's so many decisions and so many things that are impacted by that. Like, even when we think about people who will like quit their job and go do something, like having a stable job is a type of stability. Like, having that financial stability, like so many different versions of quote stability are ingrained in us because we are immigrants, or like are things that we think about because we're immigrants. Like the idea of like wealth or wealth accumulation, like for example, like my mom and I, when we moved to Canada, like we didn't really have a lot of money, and so like the idea of like having that stability or that income or financial stability is a really big thing. And so, when we're thinking about like switching jobs or whatever, like I wish somebody had told me to like take a chill pill and like calm down, and like you don't have to literally start working the minute that you graduate university and whatever. But and as much as I like am like resentful, for lack of a better word, of that, I do understand why I thought like that and why that's how I was guided, because I understand that mindset of where that came from.
Yeah. I wish we could be people that could just get up and go. We were talking about this, I remember, and I was like, straight up, I just wish we had different personalities. Like, I wish we could just get up and go wherever we wanted to.
Like, I actually wish I was not myself. I wish I was somebody else entirely.
I just wish I had a different life. I just wish that this wasn't such an issue.
Yeah.
Part of me, I've never been the type of person to like make, I don't even know how to describe this, but like I think of university and I came home often. Or I think of like, I don't know. I never really had that life of like, I'm gonna live 100% independently.
Yeah.
My family, it was nice knowing you. I will see you when I see you, and then I'm
Yeah.
just gonna go and do whatever. And I look back now and I wonder if it is something that I'm missing out on, or I think given all of this, if I were to do something like that now, if it would even make me happy. And so like when we're contemplating a big move, I question if it's something that I need or if it's something that I get anxious when I think about it, and I don't know if it's because I need that change or I'm just scared to make it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think another thing too is what you had just said, where you're like, I question whether it's something that I actually want,
Yeah.
because it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, I think it's just this idea that has been literally spoon fed to us for so long. And one of the things that we were saying at the beginning of this conversation was how, in both of our cultures, like the time that you would leave your family is the time you get married. But the reason that obviously doesn't really work as much anymore is because people got married at a much younger age before
Yeah.
than people are getting married now. And so like we're 25, like we would have been married by now. Or
Also, what
20.
the hell am I doing? Am I gonna bring a guy home to this is my childhood home?
But that's what people did, right? Because like that was
I slept in when I was 12.
but that's what people did, because like that was just like the thing, like that's just what you did. And so I think, I don't know, like I really like think about it often. I mean, I don't know. I'm just going to say the same thing. I do not know. I think about a lot of the decisions that I make, and I'm cognizant of the fact that it is driven by this like idea of stability, this idea of attachment that was sort of, that has been like sort of fed to me, whether that's because of the community that I grew up in, like as in this Western society, or because of like my family and um seeing things that they have gone through, or like how hard it was for them to get up and move. um but I feel this inner conflict where I kind of feel like, well, you have to do things for yourself, but at the same time I'm like, but doing things for yourself is not mutually exclusive from like the ideas and values that you like grew up with and know of, like being a part of a family or like feeling that sense of responsibility in some way.
I'm having a hard time finding um okay, I'm just gonna say it. I don't even know if this would be the right way to say it. I'm having a hard time finding a meaningful and actual relationship. And partly because I can't separate, like I'm too in my head about it in terms of like my background and introducing them to my family. Not because I'm at all ashamed of my family. That's not it
No.
whatsoever. It's that I am looking for someone so specific. Like he has to be so specific. And I'm just putting extra pressure on myself that the relationship he has to have with my family, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It's something that I think about a lot, because think I think I think I've said this for a long time, but I think I'm realizing like more and more the impact that the relationship your partner has with their family and the relationship that you have with your family and how that comes together, like
Mhm.
how important that is. I think, like for example, my parents are divorced, but I always think about how there are our families, like both my mom and my dad and my biological dad and then my stepdad's families are all very close. And that's so strange. Like that's not something that you would necessarily think of as normal, but like it has been, I don't know, however many years since my parents got divorced, and like all of our families are still super close and or like close enough and whatever. Um and I think about how much I love that and how much I want that reciprocated in like my future relationships. Um and I don't even just mean that with like romantic relationships. Like I genuinely mean that with like all relationships. It's why like you and your like mom, for example, come over to like my house for like specific celebrations or whatever, or like why invite you, whatever. And yeah, like I do know what you mean. I think it's a lot of pressure to put on someone that you actually don't know who is
Yeah.
who is
Yeah.
like not there yet.
And I just feel like I need to chill a bit, to be honest. I feel like I need to relax, but I do put a lot of pressure, not just on the person, but like on myself. And I remember I'd be like dating someone and I've almost pre-screened them in my mind on
Yeah,
whether or not they're someone I would bring home.
yeah,
And I've cut relationships short, or I just haven't let them
yeah,
like
yeah,
extend any farther or further than they were for that specific reason because I was like, I just can't imagine you sitting at
yeah,
a table with my family. Like, not that I didn't think that they would be respectful in any way or that
yeah,
they
yeah.
wouldn't bring a good impression, but I think ultimately I'm like, this has an expiry date, and the expiry date is right now.
It's expired. It is
And so
already.
thanks so much. The shelf life like wasn't too long. I had a great time,
It's over now.
but it's done. Thanks so much.
I think it's hard because it kind of goes back to what we were saying about like what our family unit means. But at the end of the day, I think that when you find that person or whatever, like because family is so important
Hmm.
to you, that it would that is a quality that you would automatically look for in that person. And then and so it would like be similar. Like it would breed the same, like that would be a value that would be present in both of your lives. And so it would like translate into your relationship,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. I do find as well though that I don't know if it's like the older I'm getting, I'm just really feeling like a disconnect from my roots the longer, we settle into our lives here, which is natural. But for some reason, the way I have it built in my mind is that my future, whatever husband, will come from the same background and that will be my reconnection. Like I don't know if that's how I've like I don't know if that's how I have it in my head where I'm like, oh, that is the answer. Like I will just marry someone within the same culture and we'll just sort of like keep it going. But what's to say what their connection is like? And that's a very specific person to look for. And am I holding myself back from other people?
But also, why wouldn't just you being you be enough of a connection to your culture? And
Because I
you being like, and you having that connection in
yeah,
your relationship be enough for that to be the connection?
because I almost feel like the connection within me is sort of dwindling, that it's like fading. Um and that's not to say that like I have thought about like how do I respark it? Like how do I get it back up and running? But I think I have this fear of like longer term of losing it completely.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah. That's why I put so much emphasis on on um
Lebanese. Anytime you're like, if Nadine meets someone new, she doesn't even say like, "Hi, my name is Nadine." She goes, "Hi, I'm Lebanese." They're like, "Is that a name?" Or
or like anyone who is like Like, do you remember that account you sent me? She's a therapist and she's on that podcast, Anxious Like You.
Yeah, Michelle.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was like, you know what? I think she's Lebanese. She turned out to be Lebanese. Fun fact. Anytime I find out that someone is Lebanese, I like have to scream it from like a rooftop. I have to like let everybody know.
I'm dead.
So much so that I've started to also embed that in my friends. So there's honestly, fuck, do I know about hockey? But like, there's this hockey player
What?
in Maple on
That is literally not what I thought you were gonna say.
like
Like,
literally. There's this hockey player on Toronto Maple Leafs, and he's Lebanese. And Steph told me this story, and I think it's so sweet. But every time she goes to like a hockey game or something, and they're playing, she's like, "Do you know that guy's Lebanese?"
aw.
Her boyfriend's like, "I legit don't care." Like,
He's
no.
like, first of all, I know. Keegs buddy. He's like, I know. Second of all, I don't care. But I know because you've told me so many times. Um, that's hilarious. It's actually okay. So it's interesting that you say that because I was talking to one of my friends about how when my grandma passed away, and this is something that my mom and I were also talking about, is when my grandma passed away, I think both of us felt some sort of loss to like to just having that connection back to whatever our culture meant. And I think my family is very, very immersed in our in not just like Indian culture, but like specifically South Indian culture or like because like they lived in Delhi, like my mom lived in Delhi, like North Indian in that sense culture. And so I don't ever feel like I personally don't feel like I would lose that. But I also know that I know that I'm not going to marry somebody who is not South Asian. And I don't know how I know that.
Yeah.
I just know that like that is I think it's kind of it's not just that I want to keep that connection alive or anything like that. I think it's more so that my partner will I will be able to better connect to and relate to my partner if we are from the same cultural background. And there's just like so many things that I just like don't have to explain or like are just understood. Because I think, yeah, like the way that I was brought up as an immigrant is very specific, and like my experience is very. It's not that it's unique. It's not like nobody else has this experience, but like it's a specific experience, and it is a big part of why I am who I am. And in
Mhm.
order to understand me, like you would need to understand that
Yep.
in and of itself.
Yeah. I feel that exact way. I know I just said I'm very specific with people who are Lebanese, but even just like Middle Eastern culture in general. Um, because it's true. Like you have a shared experience that brings you um close in a unique way that like other types of relationships won't. And that's not to say that like if you ever dated someone that's outside of your own culture or isn't South
Yeah,
Asian, that relationship won't be special because
of course.
it we just have very high standards. So whoever comes into our life has to fulfill these freaking standards.
No, but it's freaking true. Also, like just a funny story. I was recently telling Laya, my sister, about when I was in the 10th grade, which like literally was like so long ago, and also I was like 2 years old. Um, and I was like air quote dating because again, I was 2 years old. This guy called Josh, and he's like the whitest of white guys. Like he is kinder than like anyone. Like he has a heart of gold. He is so kind. Truly, like I know he is such a nice person. So this is like in no way disrespectful to him. He's just like super white. Like he's literally never going to listen to this, and if anybody who's listening knows him, you'll know that I'm not wrong. Like he's super white, super nice, heart of gold, so kind, but very white. And he came over one day to my house after school, and my mom had made like very traditional Indian food. And so he like ate it with me and my mom, and it was like so sweet. But it's like so funny to think about this like very white guy being like, but I'm dating this girl who's Indian and I'm like super into her, and therefore I'm super into whatever she wants to eat. And like all of this is to say, like, yeah, like if you marry someone who's outside of your whatever it might be, culture, faith, religion, whatever, like having that level of like interest and support is what I would look for in
100%.
somebody who is like, no, like tell me more. Like, okay, like how do you make this? Like, what's the significance of this? Like,
Yeah.
you eat it this way. Like, how do you eat it? And like he had so many questions. And then I remember at the end, he's also like literally so tall. He's like 6 foot. And he is like a very, very white boy. And then as he was leaving, he like gave my mom a hug. And my mom was literally like, what is going on?
What is this?
He's so nice. Like I cannot emphasize this enough. He's so nice. But and and honestly, this is a story to like praise him because he was so kind and like so sweet when he came over and we were like fairly young. Like we were like what, like 14.
Yeah.
Um and like I will never date him again in my life for many reasons. But but like it was so nice of him, and you know, to talk about dating somebody who's outside of your faith and who's outside of your culture. Like he like genuinely took such an interest in like what we were eating, and like I think this is something that we've alluded to in like a previous episode, but like food is such an important part, I feel like, of culture and identity.
Yeah.
And it was really sweet of him to like make that effort and like, you know, whatever. And he would like talk about it after. He'd be like, I went home and I told my mom, and like I told her that I would like want to make it, and so we like looked up a recipe, and I like just remember so many details because it was so sweet of him to be so invested in it. But but yeah, like I think, you know, dating or marrying somebody outside of your culture, like that's the type of person they would have to be, who is like so supportive and like so on board with it.
Yeah.
And like is a way that you can still feel like your culture is being kept alive, or is still, you still have that connection to your culture despite, you know, maybe your partner not being of the same culture.
Yeah, I think that overall, the most important thing would have to be character. Like
Yeah,
you are dating someone because of who they are. And there are people who are like, just because you're Lebanese and come from the same background does not exclude you from
exactly.
dating.
Yeah, that's, yeah,
So there are definitely people that, you know, are within your culture that are absolutely not right for you. And I'm not gonna be like, sorry, there's this amazing man that is like that is amazing. Funny
and
enough, amazing man who's amazing for me, who's just come into my life. I'm not gonna be like, stop, leave now because you're not from the same background as me.
yeah,
But I think then it's up to you to
yeah,
like keep going.
yeah. And I think, you know, if it, and I know that it is, if it truly is a part of who you are, and obviously it is because it's how you were brought up, it's how you, it's like so deeply ingrained in how you think. Clearly this whole freaking episode was about us being like, this is how I think, but what do I do? um it will naturally come through in how you raise your kids and like the values that you impart in them. And I think being connected to your culture is so much more than like going through the motions of it. And it's like it is a deeper understanding of like what that culture means, or like the way that, like norms of that culture, or how they think, or you know, it just go, it's more than just like, oh well, I speak the language. Like you could speak the language and have no relation or no connection to your culture.
Yeah.
But I think both of our families being immigrants and having lived within those very specific, I feel like I've said cultures 1 million times in this episode. Like I literally, it's like every second word I say is freaking culture, but whatever. That like them coming from there, from that culture, and raising us within the same culture, I'm just going to keep saying it, will always shine through when, no matter what we do, like whether it's in our friendships, in our romantic relationships, in our work, and how we raise our kids, how we like define what family means. I think it'll always be there. So interesting, because I never would have thought that like you felt like you were losing connection with your religion or your culture.
Because I'm so intense with being Lebanese.
Like, but
Like literally, it's like, you know, the name tag. It's like, hello, my name is, and then
yeah,
it's, hello, my name is. I'm Lebanese. Like that's what follows on mine. You know what it is? It comes from an insecurity that here, where I'm neither here nor there. when I'm here, I don't feel like I'm
Here as in Canada?
fully here as in exactly. Like I'm I'm for lack of a better word, like I'm too foreign. And
Yep.
then when I go to Lebanon, I feel too white. So it's a
Yep.
sense of like I don't really know where I belong to, what I belong to. I want to connect to my heritage. I want to be as connected as possible. And so it comes from like a place of insecurity where I don't feel connected enough. And I
Yeah.
think that eventually I will lose it.
But do you think that your identity as sort of in the in between or as like a blended identity is your identity? Like it's not that you're not one or the other, it's that you're both.
I think that's what I'm trying to, and honestly, that's what I'm trying to figure out and understand. I think it's just that I never had the opportunity to fully, um, I never grew up in Lebanon. I only knew it from my summers there. And because of the, instability of the area and the constant like civil unrest, I never had the opportunity to live that life that my parents look back on
Yeah.
and think of like really fondly, and those years that define them.
Yeah.
And so I always feel like I'm looking for, this just got really deep, but I'm always looking for that Lebanon or that Lebanese experience that my parents had before the war.
Yeah.
And so I think in some aspects, that's like what I try to connect with because I actually, I don't really know her.
I think that's really interesting. I actually think it's something I think about too because I didn't grow up in India either. Like I moved when I was young and then I went back and forth a lot. But like in terms of like fully growing up and having like an extended, you know, time that I can remember there, I don't. And there's like certain fragments of it that I remember, like parts of school or parts of seeing your friends or whatever. But like I do know what you mean. I actually think that I don't know. I actually think that's something my mom goes through. Like she has been gone for so long, but like my aunt, for example, um, is still very much like still lives her life very much in India. Like she will either be there for whether it's like 6 months out of the year, sometimes like a whole year or like whatever, and she'll go back and forth between the States and India. And I think I'm like might be speaking on my mom's behalf if she's listening, but I think that's something that my mom feels.
Mm,
That the India that she grew up in and that she spent her whole life in until she was like almost 40 is not a life that she like it's not that life anymore. And so a lot of her like references, a lot of her experiences are no longer the same. And I think she kind of recognizes that either when she goes back now
yeah.
or when she like talks to my aunt who will be like, well, it's not like that anymore. Um, but I think the idea of an experience being like transient is part of the experience. So like you having whatever experience you had there is an experience in and of itself. Like your experience of Lebanon post-war or during the war rather is still valid in an experience in and of itself. Like that is the experience you should connect to. Obviously, I'm not telling you what to do, but like that is an experience you could connect to because it's still a reality, even though it's different than the experience your parents had also in Lebanon, which
Yeah.
is also a reality. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, it does. It does. I think that's like part of the like I don't know if it's like the mindset of like the if you think of like the diaspora and
Yeah.
like people who have had to either flee or they've had to move whatever for whatever reason have had
Yeah.
to emigrate from their countries.
Yeah.
And I think it's that like coming to terms with that you are leaving something not the same way that you when it was when you arrived. Like it's just that change in mindset, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Like you're leaving something because it's no longer the same as when you found it.
Exactly, exactly. But I think in my perspective, I never
You never found it.
I
And then,
never had it. Yeah, I never had it fully, and I always wonder what that was like. Like my sisters went to university in Lebanon,
yeah,
and like they obviously had their own experience with it, but they had that time there and they had that connection there. Whether or not they still have it, that's is totally up to them. But I always look back and wonder how I would have been or what my life would have been like had I been there, had I stayed there,
yeah,
or ever lived there.
yeah. No, that is very interesting. I think trying to connect or recreate a past or a connection to a past will you will always feel like you fall short
Hmm.
because that past doesn't exist anymore. So you are trying to not only create a connection that you feel like you don't have, but you're creating a connection that you don't have to something that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And so it'll always feel like it falls short because it's not there anymore. And also like I think that I don't know, I'm just speaking for myself. I think that would create a sense of it would further that sense of insecurity or disconnect in for me because I would feel like I am not creating a connection of my own with what exists now. Like you only like for example, I would only know like in India that my like mom knew, but that India doesn't exist anymore.
Hmm.
So I would need to create a connection with India or its culture or my own religion or my own culture that is more relevant to me now
Yeah.
and actually stands true to a connection now because that's how things are now. I don't know, but it's different for it's like obviously your connection and how you feel is different for everybody.
No, 100%. 100%. The challenge is just that, like, given the current state of the world, obviously with the pandemic, but then also with just the state of the Middle East and specifically Lebanon, I don't know when I will ever get that opportunity. Like, I don't know when I will ever be given that space,
To
So
exist.
I have to do it from a distance, which makes it harder.
Yeah. I guess it also brings up another question like only through is connection only through physical like physically being there? Like is
Mm.
that the only thing that or one of the main things that builds connection or is it in like the way you live your life or the values that you have or how you say your name or the way that you speak or the language or food or whatever how you dress? I don't know.
That's a really good point. I literally just sat with what you were saying.
No, it's because no, I do think about that often because sometimes I'm like it's not just about for example for me it's like not just about like knowing the latest Hindi songs or like it's not just about wearing specific clothes. It's like actually understanding what that culture is like or what those traditions are or like what how people live their lives and like what those mindsets are and how that like kind of has an impact on how you do things or think about things or whatever or really live your life. But then sometimes I wonder like if you leave like if I've left India, does that mean that I'm no longer in touch with what being Indian means? But I don't know, I personally don't think so because I think when I look around my even just like my room or I look around my life or I look around the people in my life and how I live, in general, that is still such a present part of it. And I would say the same for you.
Yeah. I think you can never fully like let it go. It's I think it's like it's written in our DNA. It's like a part of our roots. It's very much embedded in us. I think that when I think about this, I get the sense I just need to have my feet on the ground. Like, and that like ties into what we were saying about, constantly feeling instability. But that's also not to say that if I had my feet on the ground literally there,
Yeah, you
that
would
I would
feel
necessarily feel the stability. So I think but to your point, that is all part and parcel of what contributes to our identity today, because it's all intersectional.
absolutely.
So all of this is to say is that if there's a Lebanese guy who's Muslim who's listening, slide into my DMs. Slide
Please.
into my DMs. You are obviously the solution
I
to
actually
my
hope this happens.
identity crisis.
I actually
You're
hope
obviously the solution.
I hope we find him and he comes on
Yeah.
and
Or anyone listening who has friends, like, listen, like, hook it up. Obviously, I'm having an identity crisis right here, right now, and like, let's solve it. So, anyways, we'll just get married.
I'm dead.
Solved.
I'm actually freaking dead. I was reading this other I don't know, I don't remember what it was. I think it was something on social media and it was something like welcome to your like something like this is honestly sick because I've said nothing and I've said so many words. It was like welcome to your 25, like the year of your quarter life existential crisis. And I was like, freaking tweet, okay?
Wow.
Re
Wow.
bold, caps lock, font size 150,000, red, underlined, italicized. Like that's me. Literally, that is me. Like 25, I'm like, wow. Literally, I'm like the Pikachu meme. I'm like 25. Fuck. Like there's so much to figure out. There's so much to do, and everyone makes you feel like you have no time. But I have time. There's time to decide whether to move. There's time to reconnect with my goddamn identity, whoever that bitch is. There's time to figure it out. There is time. But until then, I will be staying in my parents' home, in my childhood bedroom. So you can find me in the deep, deep depths of the suburbs, living my best life. So thank you and goodbye.